Salzberg, and and I am a meditation teacher, and I was sorely tempted to have everyone chant Om, but I won't. And I'm really, really happy. Both Gina and Lisette are friends of mine, and they had not met each other until we began working together on this panel. So I'm always happy bringing people together from different parts of my life. And I'm especially happy to be talking about compassion. Even though I am a mindfulness teacher, my great love is talking about and teaching qualities like compassion. So I'll just start off by saying some of the kind of provocative elements I found in talking about compassion in a way, sort of like the myths, I think, that surround the quality of compassion, and then hear from both of my friends. So one of the things I think that's quite mistaken or misconstrued about the quality of compassion is that actually it cannot be trained. That to think of compassion as something that's trainable is to think of it as something cold and mechanistic. It's so weird. Like, I'm going to train in love this weekend and come back better or something. It's so strange. Whereas from the meditative point of view, absolutely we believe it's trainable because we believe compassion is an emergent property of how we pay attention and who we pay attention to and whom we exclude and so on. So we know meditation can train attention and therefore compassion. It's also so often felt, and I get this feedback a lot, that if you're compassionate, you're kind of a loser, you know? You're weak, you're kind of passive, you give in too much. If you're compassionate toward yourself, you don't hold yourself to a high standard of excellence or rigor. If you're compassionate toward others, you're only taken advantage of, and you lose discernment and wisdom. And so these are the kinds of things that can be very prevalent. So maybe I'll start with you, Gina, and ask, what do you think of when you think of compassion?
Well, for me, I start with myself, mainly because it's been a very personal journey. And so I think of it as a cultivation of my own heart toward vulnerability and openness, kindness and generosity, which really I learned from sitting in retreat and sitting on the cushion and meditating. But when I put my business hat on as a co-founder of a small professional services firm, I do coaching and consulting, so I see a lot of organizations. I do see it as a place to stand and ground the culture to really create toward the values that every organization has them on the wall. And if we actually take those values and inculcate them into ourselves and live out those values, I see that compassion can arise.
Lisette, what do you think of as compassion?
Well, my firm is Athena Capital Advisors, and as you probably know, Athena is the Greek goddess of wisdom and war. And actually, she was very compassionate. She provided the olive tree to the city of Athens that fed and nourished and sustained them. And for the people who work at Athena, they're all expected to embody the wisdom and compassion of Athena. And so for me, what I really think of in terms of compassion, it is the wisdom that flows from the heart, that comes from the heart.
Can you give us an example of...
Sure. Can I give you a couple examples?
Give me a couple of examples. Give us a couple of examples.
Well, again, in terms of the values that Gina was talking about, at Athena, the culture is to not only that embodiment, but the set of values that we had to put into place as we grew the firm from one location to multiple locations really had to do with this excellence, epic values, excellence, passion, integrity, and caring. And caring or compassion was explicitly part of the culture. And really, my thesis is that in business today, you really need to have both kinds of wisdom, both the wisdom of the head and the wisdom of the heart, or compassion, in order to be successful. And I can give you a couple of examples. One, we're an investment management firm, so it's really important and popular today in the world of investment management, especially with young people, to incorporate your values with your investing. And it's been around for a long time in terms of things like socially responsible investing, SRI, but in that case, you're cutting down the universes of companies that you're looking at, and people think, oh, I can't possibly do as well in my business if I have a smaller number of companies, so I can't do that. But more recently, there's been something called impact investing. And impact investing is all about doing well while doing good. And there are specific examples like Generation Capital Management, founded by Al Gore and David Blood, that takes a normal investment process, but they add on to that, looking for factors that include compassion, like environmental sustainability, good governance practices, or good social practices. And they're looking at a company in terms of not only how well are they doing for their investors on a short-term basis, that kind of left brain, head wisdom, but they're looking for that element of the wisdom that comes from the heart and from taking care of all of your stakeholders, not just your investors on a short-term basis, but also your employees, your community, your clients, and in fact, taking care of yourself. And so Generation has done really well. They have a great track record by doing good. So they're putting together standard business practices and looking at these factors that I would say are related to compassion. And in fact, we're finding that there's a positive expected return. There's an outsized return associated with being compassionate. So it's really very interesting, and that's growing in the business. And one other example I would say is just bringing that back down to how do we do it at Athena? How does that really matter? Well, we're an investment firm. What does that mean for us? And I think compassion is just critically important in some ways that were talked about in the previous panel in terms of having a safe workplace, a place where people can be a team and where they can trust each other. And to create a really strong investment performance, we have young analysts. They need to be able to make mistakes and grow and learn. And without that holding secure environment, it's very hard for them to be able to admit to it. And one thing that Hank Paulson used to say, who was our Treasury Secretary, ran Goldman Sachs, he said, run towards your problems, not away from them. And that's so important in business, in investment business, in order to recognize a problem early, find out what the reality of the situation is, have integrity around it, and from that, people can grow and learn and change. And maybe I'll give you one last example.
Oh, sure.
Okay, one more. And the place, if you think about this compassion, holding, being a place that cultivates integrity. And why is that important? Take today, we have this Ebola crisis. And there was a woman who was a nurse in Dallas, who was taking care of a patient and was diagnosed with Ebola. Well, she, in principle, she followed procedures. And they said, maybe there was a breach in procedure. But think how important it is for her to be able to share what really happened, what exactly she did, and even whether she made a mistake or didn't make a mistake, to be able to just share that. And instead of having people be judgmental, because if she can feel cared for, not afraid to share what actually happened, then that will save lives. So critically important to have compassion as a container for making the whole world really more effective.
Gina?
So I liked when you said to run toward your problems, because for me, part of the stance for compassion really is the courage right? The courage to say you made a mistake, the courage to say I failed, the courage to be transparent. I think Jan, the previous panelist, had the courage to speak out to her boss around a new job. To be authentic and transparent, I feel like are key outcomes for compassion. For examples that I've seen in the workplace, first I'll just start with my own organization. We really look at the interdependence of all beings and how we are interconnected to them. And so whenever somebody comes and works with us, we really, really try to think about what would serve them, not from a place that the customer is always right, but from a place of we are co-creating our relationship together. We do things like have people pick their own pricing, and people are always shocked when we say we do that. And most of the time, people do not pick the lowest price. And it actually surprises me sometimes. Like, you have 3 prices, and you pick the middle price. So it's great. But people get to choose, and they look at why they're choosing, how we look at reciprocity, how we look at money, and what we're doing with our money as an organization. That's how we're being transparent. I also see in organizations really, whenever the truth will set you free is one of our mottos. And there are many times where I've been working with clients and they'll be talking about someone at the office, and I'll say something like, I don't think that person is working out so well. And they'll say, no, but I just hired them, or they've been here for 15 years, or they run the blah, blah, blah. And I say, I don't think that person is working out so well. And really just hold the space for them to come through a compassionate process to, okay, maybe it's time for them to either have a new career within the organization or outside the organization, and have my own self-compassion as the boss to be okay with that. And despite having worked with somebody for over a decade, to be able and willing to go in there and say, okay, actually it is time for you to leave, and how can I help you leave in a way that's powerful and with dignity? I think those are my 2 examples.
Well, one of the things that came up in my mind listening to each of you is one of the things I say about life these days is that I really believe nothing is a straight shot. Mm-hmm. You know, we go forward, we fall down. We have to pick ourselves up or let others help us up. Mm-hmm. We make a mistake. We have to start over. We have maybe a tremendous aspiration, and we forget about it. Mm-hmm. And we have to somehow recall it. It has to come alive for us again. Or we have a list of values, and we somehow overlook them, or we look the other way, and then something happens, and we go, oh, I need to begin again. And so I think that's actually it's almost like everything has that pulsation, has that rhythm, and so then the question of resilience comes up. Like, how do we start over? How do we begin again? How do we pick ourselves up? And I think compassion is the secret ingredient there, even if it's never voiced or articulated, because how else can we have the energy and that sense of possibility and not feeling crushed and not feeling so overwhelmed by guilt or a feeling of failure that we just give up, you know? So I think it's an extremely potent and kind of flexible quality in that I think it's really the active ingredient in many things that we need for success.
Yeah, what I like to say is people get so upset when trust is broken at work, which I can understand that, but it's like, who are you in the face of that broken trust, and how do you repair that trust? And it's the courage to repair that trust is the resilience and grows from the compassion.
And I think that, with that self-compassion and with that resilience that brings you courage, it can take us away from the kind of idiot compassion, which is a term that Chogyam Trungpa used for compassion that really isn't compassion, it's just taking the easy way out. Mm-hmm. And gives you the courage to do the hard thing. Because in the case of the employee you were talking about, it'd be easy to keep that person there for 15 years, you know, and keep taking the easy way out, which is supposedly compassionate by some measures, because you're not, you know, firing the person or letting them go. But really, at the end of the day, the compassionate thing is to recognize the issue, have the courage to have the conversation, and let everyone move on in a way that has dignity.
So I'm accustomed, of course, to the idea of training compassion through meditation, through actually training attention differently, so it's more inclusive, it's freer, it's like we play with the way we pay attention. So it's not just looking at the negative in ourselves, for example, but actually admitting the good, things like that. So just for a few moments, I wondered if you each had examples of how you might train compassion in the workplace. Let's start with you.
Well, this is the answer I give to every time anyone asks me a question about what to do next. So my first answer is get enough sleep. It's really, really hard to be compassionate when you haven't slept. Or that also includes eating, you know, not being so angry. So really, you know, the basic, you know, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, sleepy. However, the other thing, you know, I would say, I teach people to send wishes to people who they struggle with. I call it you know, you have those people in the office, and when they walk down the hall, or you hear their name, or you see their email, you have this eye roll, but we're all sophisticated that it's an energetic eye roll. So I actually have people, every time you hear that person's name, just wish them well. And if you, from an authentic place, and that wishing well can actually alter your relationship with that person. I suggest, well, obviously meditating and mindfulness moments and pausing, as people have described. And then really just notice how you are connected to everyone. You know, we think we go to work and we have our little team, and we don't think how our team connects to the team next door. We don't think how our office connects to the office on the next floor, the next building, that we are all interconnected. And then finally, I'll just add, really a practice that we do at Seven Stones is really to be complete with every and all conversations. And when I mean complete, I mean empty, that there's nothing left to say, to have the courage to have said everything, and then move from there. And the completion might not last forever. You might walk down the block and go, oh, I forgot to say this, and you can go back and complete again. But in the space of completion, in the emptiness, for me, I have the experience of compassion arising.
Thanks. Yeah, and for me, as the CEO of the company, the place where cultivating compassion really comes in is in setting the policies and the way the company works. So that has to do with including caring into performance reviews and having things like an Athena Cares Committee. That's important, and where we look at how are we interacting with all of our different stakeholders in terms of caring about them. What do we need to do differently for our employees? What are we doing next for our community? And so that it becomes a way of life, and it really becomes part of the culture of the firm in terms of how we treat each other. And hopefully there's a tipping point with those takers and the givers so that it weeds out the takers.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions, and then I also wanted to say that we'll all be available during the break. If you want to come up and just speak, that would be lovely. And we have time for 1 or 2 questions. And I don't know where the microphone's are.
This woman over there in the back. Yeah. So we can work out who's going to choose the question.
I even get 3 questions.
Hi. I'm just wondering if, as you have been working on your practice and working on these concepts, if you find any correlation between age and people who have a lot of compassion. Because if I think about sort of as I've aged, you know, when I was young, I was driven, I wasn't listening, I was probably pissed a million people off. And now I like to think maybe I have a little bit more wisdom and compassion. And I'm wondering if you see that in your workforce and how that's evolving as this trend continues to develop.
We have a super young workforce by and large. And I think you're right that people come into it initially without necessarily a very good understanding of what that is. But after they have themselves, you know, made a mistake, an error of some kind, of some magnitude, and been treated compassionately without judgment, or they've seen what the benefit is of the culture, they've actually lived it, then it's like an aha moment for them. Like, oh, you know, we do much better as a team as opposed to a bunch of individuals.
I would say I haven't seen that. I think what I've seen more is anyone who has a spiritual practice, whether it's meditation or they're Jehovah's Witness or Muslim or Christian, I find that they seem to bring that into the workplace a little more. So I haven't, and I've seen that regardless of age, so I personally haven't seen the age thing.
Yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, wisdom can come as we age, but so can bitterness and a sense of isolation. I recently, just like this morning or last night, I had to put in my age in some online thing. And one of my big beefs about life is how these days I have to scroll down like 1,000,000 miles to get to the year that I was born. And I think it's so unfair. And this particular one started the other way around. And I was like so happy. And I was so happy I actually missed my birth year because I just kept scrolling. I no, wait a minute. You know, like, look at that. You know, so there are a lot of internal pressures, a lot of external pressures that can make it a challenge to remember the force of compassion.
But I do think one other thing that's super important is that for a business that is going to be compassionate, and honestly, I think of the businesses that just use, you know, the aggressive kind of Wall Street, greed and fear kind of part of intelligence and don't use all the intelligence, the heart too. You need to put people in positions of responsibility, the senior people who have that aspect of compassion, who are putting heart as well as mind into things. And so in an organization that's a compassionate organization, then what will rise to the top and the older and more senior people are the ones who can hold the space for the younger people.
That's great. Okay, maybe one more question.
Hi, my name's Peter. I've had a meditation practice now for about 3 or 4 years, and I find that I've really been able to develop a sense of compassion for others, even with difficult people in my lives, people that I have big problems with. I find the most difficult thing is having compassion for yourself. I guess, why is that, and how can you develop more compassion for yourself?
It can be, ironically, most difficult to develop compassion for ourselves. I think that is often true. In many classical meditation traditions, you're instructed to start with yourself because you're supposed to be the easiest person. And that is just not the case for many of us. I think it's just the force of conditioning, and also it's often a kind of cognitive hang-up that we feel that's wrong. That's selfish, it's self-centered, it's going to make me lazy, it's going to make me lose principle or standards. I'm just going to keep forgiving myself, so what the hell, I'll make another mistake. I mean, I've heard all of that many times. And so I think that cognitive shift is really important, that this is not selfish, it's not a stupid or lazy thing to do. This is really, it's like resource building. You know, it's very hard to give from a place of depletion and exhaustion. So it really is like building in a resource so that we can be able to genuinely and authentically give. And so, and it's really a question of practice. It sounds a little tedious, but you know, I've done meditation practices for a very long time without thinking anything was happening. But I've discovered in my life, in an encounter, meeting a stranger, or when I've made a mistake, that I actually was building up that resource that whole time. And so some of it is a question of practice, and some of it I think is a question of not looking at your formal practice for the result, but looking at your life. So, okay, thank you all so much.
Thank you.